Hopefully we have everybody in today so that we can do our activity. It's better with a slightly larger groups. All right, recording has started. So welcome everyone to class today. The first thing I wanted to remind everybody and mention is about our exam that starts tomorrow. So basically right after midnight tonight, the exam will be open, and it'll be open all day Friday, all day Saturday, so you can find a time that's convenient for you to take it. It is multiple choice. You will find it here in the Unit 1 section. It'll essentially appear right after midnight, and you'll be able to click Unit Exam 1. So it is 90 minutes, 60 questions, all multiple choice, open notes, open books. So do study for it. You won't have time to look up every single answer, but if you study for it and you take the test and you find that there's 5 questions that you just don't remember, you would have time to say, look those up or review your notes on those during the exam time. So any questions about the logistics of the exam at all? For the study guide, as a reminder, these first couple questions up here, you can expect multiple or a few multiple choice questions on these topics. So how are epigenetics related to development through the lifespan? There's a couple multiple choice questions on that. But then the rest of the whole exam looks essentially exactly like numbers 10 through 18. So yeah. We should have some time at the end of class today to go over some of the study guide if you would like. If we don't end up having time, send me an email. Where can you find the study guide? Good question. It's here. It's currently open in your unit exam or Unit 1 area in Canvas. So it should be the very bottom thing that you see right now is the exam study guide. So click that. You can download the PDF and then work on that. So again, the multiple choice questions are very similar to even exactly like what you'll see on the exam. The exam has about 10% really easy questions that if you've even been half paying attention for the book or the lectures, you'll definitely get. And then about 10% pretty difficult questions. A few of those are actually here on the study guide. And then most of the questions are just kind of a reasonable difficulty, so not that difficult. But the way you do it is just click your answers in response on Canvas and it'll give you your grade right away. One thing to be careful of on Canvas is if you click an answer and then you use like your arrow key to move down the page or something like that, sometimes that actually changes your answer, like shifts your answer to the next point down. So just watch out for that. If you find that that happens after you've taken a test, if you're like, oh no, I know I put this answer, but it's this obviously wrong answer, just email me and let me know. But hopefully we have a little bit of time to actually go over some of these questions at the end of today. All right, feel free to type any of your other questions about logistics of exam right now. We'll jump into talking about temperament. So we really quickly mentioned temperament last time. Let's talk about the differences between them. We have easy child, difficult child, and slow to warm up child. The easy child is, why is that doing that? Maybe we'll just click out of there. There we go. So the easy child generally has a positive mood. And some of the key differences here is that an easy child can establish routines really easily. So this is an infant, remember, so under 2. And so they're establishing a sleep schedule, establishing a feeding schedule that's pretty consistent day by day. And a big thing is that they adapt quickly to change. So if you take that child to grandma's house, they will be able to reestablish their routine pretty quick. The first day might be a little difficult, but day 2 or night 2 should be about the same as at home. So they're reestablishing that routine. For a difficult child, they'll react more negatively more frequently. They might cry more frequently than an easy child. Obviously, an easy child's going to cry and fuss as well if they get hungry, things like that. But a difficult child will be doing that a little more often. So the big difference here, though, is that a difficult child is a lot slower to adapt to change, and it's harder for them to set a routine. So their routine at home might be really variable. They eat at random times or seem to sleep at random times. It's not at the same time chunks every day, which can be difficult for the parent. And this is why they're called difficult child, is parents and researchers who are parents that were naming it. And then they're also slow to adapt to change. So you take a more difficult child to grandma's house. Their sleep schedule will be all messed up. Their feeding schedule will be all messed up. They might be more grumpy than usual because they're not sleeping or eating enough. So those would be pretty clear indicators that it's a more difficult child to care for. Then the slow to warm up child is a little bit different. They might have a little more negative activity level or emotions, maybe cry a little more. But the key difference here is that they have a really low activity level. They don't really do too much. So if you meet a niece or a nephew and they don't really seem to be fussy or really happy, if they're kind of just boring to you, they might be a slow to warm up child. Probably don't tell their parents that you think their child is boring, though. That's probably not a very good thing to do. But just another word to like associate with slow to warm up child. So what is the importance of these kinds of temperaments? What kind of impact do these have on children's lives? For a difficult child versus an easy child, which one do you think will have more potential positive outcomes? Which one do you think will have more attention? Which do you think will have more positive outcomes on average? Or what will life be like for them and for their parents? So feel free to just take over the mic or type in the meeting chat area as well. So Brady comments slow to warm up. So what's because I asked like a multi-pronged question, so that was my fault. Sorry about that. So what are you saying for slow to warm up, Brady? Go for it. Oh, no problem. So I didn't ask the question very well anyway, so I definitely understand your misunderstanding. Let's compare a difficult child versus an easy child. Which do you think would have more positive interactions with their parents and why? Like just in a day-by-day setting. And that question's for everybody, not just Brady. No one has a guess of who's going to end up having more positive interactions, a difficult versus an easy child? Easy? Yeah. Easy would have a lot more positive interactions. Yeah. So what do you think the day-by-day interactions would look like for the easy child? What might the parent be doing, their specific behaviors towards the easy child versus the difficult child that would lead to more positive interactions? Yeah, it might be easier to keep a calm environment in the home. Really good. And thanks for the comments. Also, feel free to use your mic. You can use the chat box. This is just fine. But you can also use your mic anytime. All right. So yeah, a child who's a little easier of a child is going to have probably more positive interactions. Oh, we've got another comment here. So maybe the child can communicate with the parent difficult, or communicate with the parent better than the difficult. So yeah, the parent probably feels less stress when the child is easier, when they have a regular routine, the parent kind of knows what to expect. And so they're probably able to also, with a easy child who's maybe crying less, that communication is a little clearer for the parent. So it makes things calmer. It makes it easier for the parent to know what the easy child needs. So they might be more responsive versus a difficult child. The parent might actually attend to them more and try to give them their needs. But on the other hand, another parent might attend to them less, get really more frustrated and stressed and not want to deal with all the stress of the difficult child. So it's not all down to just the child's behavior, but also how the parents behave in reaction to the child too. So really good comments, really good ideas there. These are some kind of personality styles, you could say, for children. And they were some of the first that were discovered and described. More recently, Kagan's behavioral inhibition studies showed that, well, maybe there are some other traits that children have. Personality psychology moved away from looking at overarching behavior types or personality types to looking at more specific traits that people might have or not at certain strengths. So that kind of happened around the same time, and saw that, well, some children might be shy or subdued or more timid. Some children might be more sociable, extroverted, and bold. And this is, again, under the age of 2. So this isn't like going and playing in preschool yet, but just with peers that they might be around or with family members as well. So from those studies, they saw that inhibited children might have higher risk for developing anxiety disorders in adolescence and adulthood. Maybe these children, because they're a little more timid, are not interacting with people as much, are not building those social skills and socio-emotional skills as well. So they're maybe a little more anxious in childhood and adulthood. So most of these studies are correlational, so we can't necessarily tie a causal data to it, but if you do a good longitudinal study, you can get causal data from that. So some of these studies are longitudinal for causal data, most are correlational, just because that's easier for researchers to do, honestly. I was actually thinking about that earlier when I was reviewing this. I do suspect that babies now during the pandemic who aren't interacting with people other than probably in their immediate household might have a slightly more chance for developing anxiety disorders, especially, I think it's a multi-pronged thing, because as well during the pandemic, there's been a lot of adults as well who have their anxiety or depression has gotten worse, or they've come down with clinical depression or been diagnosed or not been diagnosed, but still suffering from these disorders. And when a parent themselves is suffering from depression, we talked about maternal depression last time and how they're a little slower on average to respond to the child and give them the care and concern they need. Same kind of thing. So there's probably, even though everybody's kind of stuck in their own little family units, there might be less warm, positive interaction. We'll have to see what tends to be the average. So my wife and I are both psychologists, developmental psychologists, especially, well, she's actually got a degree in, what is it? She was developmental, then she switched her degree. It doesn't really matter for this story, but it's really annoying me that it just left my mind. Anyway, so we know a little bit about development, so we try to like offset that. But how do most parents, how are they dealing with this? How are they interacting? So yeah, I do suspect that it might lead to more likelihood of anxiety disorders in adolescence and adulthood for not just infants, but probably also early children. So like my daughter doesn't really get to do play dates, or my son doesn't really get to do play dates right now, which is really tough. Finding that balance between being safe and positive development and those protective factors. It is a difficult tightrope to walk. But really good question. And there's a lot of medical research on like the physical biological effects of the virus that is coming out really quickly. There's actually papers being published before peer review to give other places the data quickly that then go to get peer reviewed. For psychology studies, we've always been a little slower than medical field. So there are starting now to be papers coming out about with data from the pandemic, but usually that data is from the very first couple months. So in the next 6 months, we should see things from the next little bit of time in the pandemic. So that is one weakness of science, is it does, good science does tend to be a little slower than, in some cases we need it. We need it faster in like this kind of case, which is nice that some of that medical and like vaccine research can be done a little faster than some of the psych research. And the systems that were already built were better for that. But that's a little more tangential than I intended to get into. But yeah, really great question. I do think likely that there will be higher anxiety disorders. So other researchers made other classifications around personality kind of traits or types. The one I want to focus on here is effortful control, because really one thing that Rothbard and Bates is that a child is not does not have just one of these. So a child has the capacity for effortful control, and their research was saying, is their effortful control low or was it high? So they weren't saying they had effortful control or not. It's more of a range, versus before, the slow to warm up child, that was your category, and that's where it was kind of expected that you would stay. Versus more recent research says, oh, you might have 70% effortful control versus 100% or something like that. So a good example of effortful control that you might have heard of is the marshmallow study. So take a child at like 1.5 years old, sit them at a table, give them a marshmallow on a plate. The researcher says, hey, you can eat this marshmallow now. I've got to go and do a thing. I'm going to come back in 3 minutes. If you haven't eaten the marshmallow, I'll give you 2 extra marshmallows. So see if a child has that effortful control that they can resist eating that marshmallow. And with that being said, effortful control and all of these capacities are capacities that can be built. They're skills. They are not like fixed forever. So for a child with good effortful control, they tend to have higher self-regulation, better at setting goals in childhood, adolescence, adulthood, better emotion regulation. They're be able to, because effortful control comes from the prefrontal cortex. So if that is developed enough that you can control your behavior, you should also be able to do better emotion regulation. So helping a child build emotion regulation in early infancy can lead to more effortful control. Doing specific kinds of things to build effortful control is really good. So this is one reason the more recent research is really good, because it shows, oh, these are certain capacities that children may or may not have at certain levels. But we also realize, well, they can build effortful control. Just because a child comes into the experiment today and they don't have good effortful control doesn't mean in 2 weeks, 2 months, 2 years that they won't. They can build that ability and capacity. And so a lot of research looks at, well, how can we give reduced risk factors and increased protective factors? Effortful control is an example of a protective thing. If you have good effortful control, it can lead to more positive outcomes in the future. So again, yeah, the Rothbard and Bates didn't categorize infants as saying you have 20% effortful control. That's where I think you're going to stay your entire life. We're realizing in developmental research that these capacities can change and be built. And a lot of applied work tries to do that, try to influence people. So if you look at this model again, hopefully it's becoming more clear to you. A child has their own biology. Maybe neurologically, they haven't developed the capacity for effortful control as early as maybe even a twin or something. Well, if it's a twin, it's probably not down to biology. But they have their own biology, their health, and behaviors that they've learned, and then their temperament. These aspects of their personality and their temperament, do they have high effortful control or low? And that's going to interact with how the parent parents them. So if they have good effortful control, the parent might be able to let the child be on their own for a little bit longer and have a little less lax or a little more lax safety procedures in the house, like things covered in foam all over, things like that, just as some simple examples. And that will change how the parent parents the child and how the child interacts with the parent. So hopefully it's becoming more clear to you, this complex model, that these little aspects of the individual are interacting with aspects of the parent and changing how everybody behaves with everybody else. So, this is a fun experiment. If you know someone under the age of 2, you might try. When we're talking about a sense of self and seeing yourself as a separate individual to others, and having your own identity, well, the initial stages of identity, what we later call an identity. Um, what's the terms that were used last time in class that we were talking about this? Theory of mind. That's what we're connecting to. One funny way to test this is with the mirror test. So for a child under the age of 2, you can put a dot, maybe a sticker, or draw with a marker like on their nose or on their head, and put them in front of a mirror. It suggests their behavior might suggest if they have a sense of themselves or if they don't. So if they go and touch the dot on their own nose, so they see in the mirror, the baby in front of them has a dot on their nose. If they touch their own nose, they might have a sense that, oh, that person in the mirror is me. Versus if they touch the dot on the mirror, they might not have that sense that that person in the mirror is them. And so that might suggest something about their own understanding of their sense of self. And we see that before the age of 1, very few children can do that correctly, realize that the dot is on themselves, versus by the age of 2, quite a few are able to. One thing with my children, we had a really big mirror in the house we were living in when they were this age, and so they were crawling past it all the time. And so I actually did this test with them at different times in their childhood, and they did it much earlier than these observations, but I really think that's down to the fact that they had so much more experience with the mirror. They were interacting with it every single day, versus a lot of infants probably aren't interacting with the mirror in that much detail every single day. They would like play their blocks right in front of the mirror, that kind of thing. So that suggests that, well, maybe the methodology could be a little stronger, but it also suggests some of the weaknesses we have to testing. Hey, do you have a sense of self, 1.5-year-old? We have to rely on these kinds of observations. All right, so let's move on to attachment, and we've got an activity here. How many students do we have in the class now before this activity? All right, it looks like everybody is here, so that's great. We'll have a couple groups of 4, I think. Probably just based on your alphabetically. All right, so what is the relevance of the monkey in this picture? What was this study doing, and why is it relevant to attachment? So feel free either to type it in a comment or take over the mic, and you can talk about it that way. Yeah, very good. Very good summary as well. So the experiment showed that attachment is about comfort, not just about who fed the baby monkeys. Yeah, really good. So with that, you can see the wire here. There's a wire frame. So one of the monkeys had just the wire frame and no cloth over it. And that one with a wire frame, so basically the wire mother, had nipples with milk that could come out. So basically like a bottle. So that was the only place the baby could get food, versus this mother with the soft cloth also had a light bulb inside, so it was similar to like the actual temperature of a real monkey, but they didn't interact. They have weird, creepy faces there, probably just because that's what the researchers wanted to do, put weird, creepy faces on them. Maybe there was some purpose for it, but it does look creepy. Anyway, what was found was exactly what you just said, was that the experiment showed that the monkeys attached more to these mothers that had the cloth and were warm versus the ones that had the food. Previously in the field, there was kind of this disagreement. People thought that a lot of children's behavior was based exclusively on behaviorism and their reinforcement of their physical needs. So if the competing idea was, if it was all based on physical need, well, then the monkey would spend more time with the wire mother that fed it. And it would just stay there because that's where it could get fed. Um, in both cases, they were safe. It wasn't actually in any danger. And so it would just stay with the one that fed it. That's how it would develop an attachment with the thing that fed it. Versus what was found, and this is what some other researchers suggested, was that it was actually more socio-emotional led to that bond, that the cloth mother with the warmth would lead to more social and emotional cues that would make the monkey more attached to that. And what they found was that was the case, that we're more attached because of those socio-emotional cues, warmth in responding, those kinds of things. So it was one thing that really started to move us forward in understanding the importance of social-emotional interaction with people. So this is a graph of the time spent with the wire mother versus on the cloth mother. Basically, the monkeys would just run back and feed on the wire mother and then come back and stay basically the whole rest of the time on the cloth mother. So good. So attachment is that close emotional bond between people. Usually these studies are about mothers and children, but it also includes fathers, close caregivers, grandparents. So these same findings apply to those, but there's been less studies on like grandparents or babysitters or siblings, even though it does also attachments form between those people as well. So John Bowlby did some more recent research on the phases of developing these attachments. So this is basically bullet points of some of those things. And this is basically more recent research. So if you're interested in attachment, I definitely encourage you to look over this in more detail, just these bullet points. But for our purposes, this is like graduate level paper that this came from. But I do want it accessible to you if you're interested more in attachment. It's a big area of research. Oh, I just muted my sound. So it's there for you, but we're not actually going to read that in detail. Instead, what we'll do is jump back to some of the beginning of the field's research in attachment. First, Mary Ainsworth. Yep, Mary Ainsworth. First, Mary Ainsworth made the categories for attachment based on home visits. Basically, she would spend an entire day with a mother and their child and see how they interacted and determine, is that a secure attachment? Is that an insecure attachment? What kind of insecure attachment? But to figure that out in a whole day of a visit, so 8 hours or so, that's a long time for a researcher to spend with one family. And then based on that, you could correlate it with things that happen later on in the children's life. You can follow longitudinally, things like that. But they needed a faster way to assess attachment. So what Mary Ainsworth came up with was this strange situation scenario. So hopefully you already read about it in the book. We're actually going to be watching 2 examples of this strange situation playing out and working as a group to figure out what kind of attachment styles we see in them. So in the beginning, again, most of the times this is done with a mother. So the mother and the child come into the room and play with toys. Usually this is like an office or a classroom on a campus that they've put baby toys in and like put colorful things on the walls. So they come here to the experiment or the simulation really, and they play in this room. So you watch the interactions between the child and the parent, and then a stranger comes in. And then you can still see some interactions between child and parent. Maybe the child might or might not interact with a stranger. Then the parent leaves. So you see, what does the child do when the parent leaves? Did they fuss? Did they cry? Do they not care at all? Do they seek comfort from the stranger? Then the parent will come back. And then after that, it depends on the kind of, there's a couple different variations. But usually that's one of the endings. Another thing you can do is everybody leaves, the child alone, or maybe the stranger just comes back after leaving the child alone. So there's a couple different variations, but the big key here is it's an observational method where you're watching to see what is the interactions with the child and the caregiver. Are they securely attached? Is it an insecure attachment? And you're looking for specific evidence that would suggest one or the other. So let's go over a couple of these attachment styles. secure attachment, in this kind of situation, a child who's securely attached will use their caregiver as a secure base. So the child will use the caregiver as a secure base. They'll explore the room. Maybe they'll look back to the caregiver or come back to the caregiver before going off to play. And that also happens later on in life, into early childhood. So with this situation, they might cry when the parent leaves. They might be even really upset. But when the parent comes back, they're generally able to pretty quickly reestablish positive interactions with that caregiver. They'll often even go back to playing, like away from the caregiver. They realize their base is there, their secure attachment is there, they're safe again, they can go back and play. So those are some things to watch for in these situations. What of those behaviors do you see? Is it a secure attachment? Do they show those things or not? Insecure avoidant is one type of insecure attachment. And in this, the child shows insecurity by avoiding the caregiver almost entirely in some cases. So they might have very few interactions with the caregiver. It might seem like they don't even care that the caregiver is there or that the caregiver leaves. They might not try to reestablish any contact when the caregiver comes back. They might even move away from the caregiver. And you can imagine this kind of situation. Maybe this child has grown up learning that they can't actually rely on that caregiver. They don't have a secure attachment because the caregiver isn't there for them for whatever reason. Another type of insecure attachment is insecure resistant. So in this, the child is wanting to cling to the caregiver. They want that comfort from the caregiver, but they might also resist that closeness. Let's say the parent comes back in, the child might want to get a hug, but then push away and run away and not want anything to do with the caregiver. Oftentimes, they won't explore the room and explore toys. They'll very often cry really loudly and be really distressed when the caregiver leaves, but then really hard to soothe when the caregiver comes back and not be able to get back into playing if they were even doing it beforehand. So they are insecure and resistant. Maybe they have maybe they've had experiences where the caregiver's there some of the time, but not some of the time. Like some of the time the caregiver is responsive, but some of the time the caregiver is not responsive. So they know that they want that closeness, but they also know that they can't rely on it from the child's perspective. So hopefully you've been writing a couple notes. I didn't mention that before reading these. Hopefully you have been writing a couple notes on these types. So insecure, insecure avoidant, or insecure resistant. Maybe also pull up the slides on your own computer so that you can kind of look over them while we watch these examples. So basically right now we're going to watch these two examples, and then as we do that, I'm going to start pulling them up. So we're going to watch these two examples, and while we watch these examples, sorry, I'm trying to find it at the same time I'm doing other things as talking. I'll just focus on talking. So we'll watch the examples. We'll watch two, and after each one, I'll give you a minute or so to write some notes on it. So we'll watch example one, give you a minute to write some notes. Then we'll watch example two, write some notes, and we'll do that all together in this main meeting room. Then after we've watched those two, we'll break off into the small groups. So right now we've got, looks like 7 students. So why don't we have, we'll split it off at, basically, I mean, that's not even numbers, so maybe we'll have the first 3. We'll have like Brady, Caitlin, and Mackie in group 1, and then Nicole, Rachel, Sierra, and Tamara, I'm sorry, I forgot how to pronounce it. My mom's name is actually Tamara, so that's what I want to say. So I apologize if that's not the correct pronunciation. I'll look over my notes again. So we'll have the last 4 in the class in the list as I see it in the second group, and the first 3 in the first group. So what to do to get to that group meeting is click on the little Teams icon. I'll make this bigger so you can see it. So those first couple students jump to the A through H group room, even if your name's not A through H. And then the second set of students use this I through Q room. Maybe I'll rename them to rooms 1 and 2 because we have so few students in the class. So again, this is where you'll find it. You'll click there. You can do a chat meeting or a voice meeting or a video meeting, whatever you choose. Basically in that meeting, you'll talk about, I think example 1 was this kind of attachment. These are the specific things I saw. And if there's a lot of agreement, it'll be a pretty quick meeting. If there's not, you can kind of deliberate. Well, I thought it was more secure, or I thought it was more insecure avoidant, or I thought it was more insecure resistant. But these are the group meetings. So first 3 students on that list in A through H, the second 4 in I through Q. So again, we'll split it up that way. Hopefully you could all see where I was going there. So Brady, Caitlin, and Mackie, group 1, Nicole, Rachel, Sierra, Tamara in group 2. And first though, we'll watch those videos together, and then we will break off into groups. So I will open those now. All right, so this should be those videos.
The caregiver then leaves and the stranger interacts with the baby.
Mommy will be back. Come. Come. Mommy will be back. Let's play together. It's okay. Mommy will be back. Oh, I know. Mommy will be back. It's okay. It's okay. Shall we play with the toys? Shall we play with the toys? Huh? Do you want to sit on here? Yeah. Yeah? Okay. Come on. Put 1 foot up. 1 foot up. And up you go. Now you're on a truck. Now you're on a truck. And you can push. Can you push? You want him to ride with you? I know. She'll be back. I know. Oh. Mommy will be back. Mommy's coming now. Mommy's coming back. Mommy's going to come back.
The caregiver signals her return and enters.
Caroline. Hi. Hi, sweetie. Did you miss Mommy? Did you miss Mommy?
Reunites with the baby and interacts with the baby while the stranger
Are you
leaves.
making the sign for Mama's milk? Yeah. Yeah, it's not time for that right now. But we can play with some toys. Let's play with some toys. Do you see a big dinosaur? And do you see a tiger? Let's see if we can find the tiger.
So hopefully there was a couple things in that video that might suggest to you whether it was a secure attachment, it was insecure avoidant, it was insecure resistant. So take about a minute to write some notes down that you'll share with your group of like evidence, basically. All right, hopefully you wrote a couple things down there. Let's watch the second video all together. And then after that second video, we'll break up into our groups. Well, after that second video, I'll give you like a minute or so again. And then we'll break up into groups so you can discuss together. So here is the second video.
You know how to play? No? Yeah. Play with the car, that's me. You having fun? Yeah. The baby? Oh, you know it's a baby? What's the baby name? You want me to take care of her? Hi, Destiny. Good. Hi, Destiny. 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 Hey, Destiny. You having fun?
All right, so that is the second example. So take about a minute now and write down a few pieces of evidence that might suggest it was secure, insecure avoidant, or insecure resistant attachment. And then I will have you break off into those rooms. I mean, you can jump into those rooms at any time now. But yeah, take a minute to write down those notes. And then after you break into the rooms, we'll be back here at 10, let's say 10:49. Yeah, let's do 10:49 back here in the main general room. All right, let's see if we can get the other group back over here. Looks like they're still connected to this meeting. All right, so it looks like they're arriving back. So let's discuss what we thought were the different attachment styles. I know one of the groups had a lot of agreement between each of them, and the other group had very little agreement. There was some debate over which behaviors were suggested of secure attachment versus insecure avoidant versus insecure resistant. So for the first group, you both agreed on them. So for example number 1, what did your group think it was?
We thought it was secure attachment.
All right, and what were some specific pieces of evidence that suggested to you that it was secure attachment for the first one?
Well, she was sad when the mom left. And then when the mom came back, she was happy and continued to explore. Like she felt safe and able to explore while her mom was there.
Yeah, definitely. Those are some things that we talked about specifically with secure attachment. So good pieces of evidence that you pulled out there in those observations. For group 2, there was some other observations that suggested to them that it might be a type of insecure attachment. Can we have someone from group 2 jump in and either comment on the mic or put it in the chat? What were some of the behaviors they saw that suggested it was, I forget if you discussed if it was insecure avoidant or resistant, but let us know.
When I don't know, I got confused when you made the comment of like the attachment between the caregiver and like the baby itself, like as far as the insecure attachments goes. I just got confused like which relationship that I was trying to evaluate, if that makes any sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I saw that was a little bit of confusion in there. So sorry about that with not being clear earlier on. So yeah, when we're looking at these examples, most of what we're looking at is the interactions between the child and their caregiver. So how do they feel towards their caregiver? Are they attached to their caregiver? Is that a secure attachment? Do they trust that the caregiver is going to be there for them? If they trust that the caregiver will be there for them in a secure attachment, like we just heard a couple points that suggested the first one might be secure, they would use this caregiver as a secure base. And even if the caregiver leaves and they cry a lot, when the caregiver comes back, they get comforted and can get back to playing, which are a couple of the things that we saw there. So hopefully that makes it a little more clear for that first one, because the first one was secure attachment. So even though we did see the child was crying a lot, was uncomfortable, did not like the stranger trying to comfort them, when the caregiver came back, they asked the caregiver for mama milk. They got back to playing with toys. The caregiver was able to sit in the corner while the child was playing with toys, and the child felt safe to do that. They felt secure that the caregiver was there and was responsive to their needs, and really upset when the caregiver left. So hopefully that these examples make it a little more clear. do you want to discuss what your group thought for the second example? Oh, it doesn't have a screenshot here from the second example. But do you want to, or anyone in group 2, share what you decided on or what you were debating between for the second example?
Can you hear me?
I can, yeah, and I just realized I haven't been sharing my screen even though I've been referring to it, so sorry about that.
Well, I kind of disagreed with my group a little bit. I thought that the second one was insecure avoidant because she didn't cry when the parent left, and most of the time she didn't really like do anything with the parent. She even interacted a little bit with the stranger, but even when the parent left and came back, she didn't like the baby didn't really care that the parent was gone or that they came back to the spot. So it kind of was like she's avoiding the parent.
Yeah, those are some really good observations and specifics that you picked out that suggest maybe it is avoidant. So does another member of the group want to talk about, it sounds like you were discussing whether it was avoidant or resistant. So what were some of the other pieces of evidence that would suggest that it was another attachment style that you saw? And you can always use the chat box. You don't need to use your microphone as well. So they might be typing a response, but I know there was some discussion that maybe the second example was actually a secure attachment because they didn't seem worried at any point in time. And I think that might be where some of that confusion was coming from, because the child did seem just fine on their own, right? They didn't seem like they were too concerned when the parent left or when the parent came back, but that's not indicative of a secure attachment between the child and the parent. But it does suggest that the child has had to play with themselves just on their own, that they're not getting a lot of responsiveness from the parent very often. So the first, I believe it was Nicole was just saying, thought it was insecure avoidant for the second example, and that was correct. So it was an insecure avoidant attachment there. The child was not distressed when the caregiver left. Didn't try to reestablish contact when the caregiver returned, was actually looking away from the caregiver when they returned, seemed to be maybe a little more interested in playing with the stranger who had been in there and actively playing with them. So yeah, that's the first one was secure attachment. Second one was insecure avoidant. And the key there is the relationship between the parent and the child. And so the reason this is important is because it's related to a lot of the behaviors later on in life. So the child in the first example, there can be lots of reasons that there's a secure attachment there, right? There could be, actually, I'll go back to the secure attachment slide. So maybe the parent is there at home a lot with them during the day, able to be responsive, able to give the child what they need and support them all the time, and the child knows that the parent is there. Versus for insecure avoidant, maybe the child does have to play on their own a lot, and that they know they can't really rely on the parent to get their needs met. That could be for a lot of different reasons. It could be from the decisions of the parent, right, and their own choices, and maybe just not responding. But more likely, it's probably because in that specific example, it's likely that that parent is working multiple jobs or has other responsibilities that they can't be immediately there for the child. Maybe that child is getting cared for by lots of other family members around as the parent's working multiple jobs or something like that. So there are factors outside of the control of the child and the parent even that can influence this attachment style. So as we think of this developmental cascades model and the developmental systems model that we've shown, it can be things outside of the child and the parent that leads to a different attachment style. So this insecure avoidant attachment might be for something completely out of the control of the parent or the child. It might not suggest that it's the parent trying to create an insecure attachment, but that something in the context leads to this. So that is one thing that is important to understand. It's not necessarily the fault of anyone in these cases. Maybe the fault of the systems around them. So with that, the attachment that people have in early childhood is important for the whole rest of your life. So the attachment that we have on average, people who are securely attached will stay securely attached through their whole life. People that are insecurely avoidant will stay insecurely avoidant. People that are insecure resistant will stay insecure resistant. So about 75% of people keep the same attachment style that they had in childhood. So they have that attachment with their parent. Later on in life, those with secure attachments find it easier to develop secure attachments with friends and close friends. And then later on, they will tend, like say early adulthood time, someone with a secure attachment will tend to seek out partners who also have a secure attachment to their parents. And so then they will then become securely attached to one another. So those also who have an insecure avoidant attachment, they will tend to gravitate towards people who also have an insecure avoidant. And you can imagine how that might be the case, because in their childhood, this is kind of the first relationship that they had, the first attachment relationship. So this is kind of what they're expecting relationships to look like. So as they go through life, that's kind of the relationship that both these insecure avoidant attached people are looking for. And you can imagine a dating relationship between two people who are insecure avoidantly attached is going to look a little different and be maybe a little more difficult to maintain than two people who are securely attached. But that being said, while that sounds like a really terrible thing, it can be awful. Also, attachment styles can change through life. So while I said on average about 75% of people keep their attachment style, about 25% of people just naturally change their attachment style through life. But people can also intentionally change their attachment style. So let's say we had an insecure avoidant person who was insecurely avoidantly attached to their parents in their dating years. So let's say early 20s. They meet someone who was securely attached to their parents. So they come together and have a relationship. That's one of the most often or most common ways for people to change attachment styles in adulthood. Is someone who is insecurely attached gets in a relationship with someone who is securely attached. They start to realize, oh, this is how a secure attachment should be working. And it actually will change their attachment style. So from then on in their life, they have a secure attachment. It is also possible, but just a little less common, for two insecurely attached people to become securely attached with each other and change their attachment style. Other ways this commonly happens without like intentionally trying is adopting a child. So they come from one attachment style to a different attachment style in a new home or a new foster home or something like that. That's another way attachment styles change. So while attachment styles are really important for healthy socio-emotional development throughout life, if you start off with an insecure attachment, it doesn't mean you're doomed for the rest of your life. Your attachment style can change. You can still develop new skills and abilities, even if you have that specific risk factor. So insecure avoidant attachment might suggest that in the future you might be at higher risk for certain problems or difficulties. It doesn't mean you are doomed to those possible difficulties in the future. Oh, there's a comment here. Sorry, I didn't even see it pop up. So we've got a comment. I've definitely experienced feeling more secure and less anxious after being with a secure partner for a few years. Yeah, really great example there. So with these different attachment styles, they're definitely not fixed. So there are things you can personally do to change your attachment style and build good relationships with people, build socio-emotional skills. A lot of socio-emotional learning in schools, so elementary, middle, and high schools, try to focus on building those socio-emotional skills. But absolutely, that kind of natural experience with being with a secure partner can change your attachment style. And then that is an example of while you might have been at an, let's say, insecure attachment earlier on, now you have a partner who is secure, that might lead you to more potential positive outcomes in the future. So that's one aspect of plasticity that I definitely wanted to get across, and why we're using this example in so much depth, because it can affect things later in life. And having a secure attachment is what we call a protective factor. So I've mentioned risk factors quite a few times. I don't remember if I've ever defined them or protective factors, but a protective factor like secure attachment is something that's correlated to other positive outcomes in the future. So having a partner with a secure attachment or you having a secure attachment is related to, either correlated or causally related to, other positive things in the future, like higher well-being, closer relationships, things like that. Versus a risk factor, another example of a risk factor completely outside what we're talking about would be like smoking. So cigarette smoking is a risk factor for lung cancer. So that one's obviously causally related, but there's also correlation. So insecure avoidant attachment is correlated to problem behaviors in elementary school, for example, or not doing so well academically. So while those are potential possibilities of problems, it doesn't mean that people aren't capable of change, building their own skills, their environments around them changing, moving to a different environment, affecting them in different ways. So really good example, Rachel. Thank you for sharing that. Feeling more secure now after having been with a secure partner for a few years. So hopefully as you look at this kind of model, you have a better sense of how it's all interacting with each other. We've talked a lot about the family as one social context today, specifically with parenting. So let's jump forward to childcare and infants. Because many U.S. children have caregivers, have multiple caregivers, whether it's a formally licensed caregiver, but most actually have a like family member, essentially babysitters, family members that are another caregiver. So research on the formally licensed caregivers shows that about only 12% of research programs have high quality childcare. And so that's really dramatically bad, not really great. So if you have the, if you have the money and opportunity to choose between different childcare, knowing the things that are high quality or you should be looking for, I think are really important, especially when we have multiple parents who have to work. Also, here's a bunch of references. If you wanted this to be a question paper, this might be a good place to start. But some of the main bullet points for what makes good early childhood quality care is low teacher to child ratios. So having one teacher to, say, 4 children is a lot better for scaffolding and supporting those children than having one teacher to, say, 30 children, especially in early childhood. I think in high school, the kind of golden number is like one teacher to like 24 children. But you can imagine going back to elementary school and preschool times, at those ages, it just kind of grows as time goes. So smaller number, and then by high school, it's about like 1 to 25. Age-appropriate learning activities. So for an infant, things like blocks. For an 8-year-old, you'd probably want like books for them to interact with that are at their reading level, maybe activities that they would like to do that might help them with math skills. Engaging in safe learning environments. So obviously safety, but also things that the kids want to do, that the kids are intrinsically motivated to engage with. And then activities that support physical, social, and emotional growth. A lot of times, say a daycare facility will be there and have maybe some toys and be focused on getting a kid a nap and playtime. So they'll do really good with like physical, but it's harder to make things that are good for social and emotional growth. So interactive activities, games together can really help build that social and emotional growth. And then also having qualified staff, so staff that are well trained when they come in or when they get hired, they get good training, and then the opportunity for additional training later on. So a company or an organization that would pay for one of their staff to go and get extra training, because the field is learning new things a lot. So having someone who comes in or is trained to up to date and then stays up to date is really good. So those are some of the big bullet points to think of when you're thinking of childcare, if that's relevant to you, a family member, or in the future. So those are the main points I wanted to make, and the end of the socio-emotional chapter. Are there questions or comments about this content so far? If not, we'll jump to maybe a little bit of the study guide. Do I have that up? No, I closed it. I will find it again. All right, so we can jump to the study guide. As a reminder, also at this point, I think everybody's actually here. So I'll just keep the recording going if you want to review this later. Oftentimes, if students aren't here, I'll stop the recording before going over a study guide because it's like, hey, this is for students who are here and present. But it looks like everyone's here, so great job. That makes me glad. All right, so let me know any of these questions that you have questions on. We can review, we can go over probably in this much time all of the multiple choice questions, maybe a couple of these open-ended questions. Hopefully some of you have been working on it and maybe you've got one that you struggled with. I don't see any comments or raised hands. So maybe we'll just go through some of the multiple choice then. Again, as a reminder, the ones that are more open-ended up here, there's a couple questions on each of those topics. So if you read how are epigenetics related to development through the lifespan, and you're like, I don't remember anything about epigenetics, it would be a good suggestion to go and review that material. But let's go through the multiple choice questions. So starting with number 10. When taking his psychology class, Professor Sharma emphasized that developmental change, actually I'm going to make this a little bigger. Yeah, that developmental change occurs through adulthood as well as childhood. Professor Sharma is taking a blank approach to developmental change. This is also the approach we take in this course. So let's get a vote in the meeting chat. Which one do you think it is? A, B, C, or D? All right, we've got a vote for lifespan and a vote for B, evolutionary. So lifespan in this case, A is the correct answer. So looking at childhood, well, really what we do is look through prenatal development all the way through adulthood. That's looking at the entire lifespan. Versus previously in the field, a lot of research focused only on early childhood or into adolescence, but we take a lifespan approach. The evolutionary approach to psychology, so B, is looking at, well, what kind of evolutionary capacities might lead to behaviors in childhood or lead to behaviors in adolescence or lead to certain behaviors in adulthood. So looking at the genes and how that'll affect. So hopefully that helps it be a little more clear between A and B. All right, so let's jump to number 11. A negative correlation between people's work-related stress and their marital happiness would indicate, and this one's really a trick question, well, a hard question, trying to get at the fact that correlation does not mean causation. So what do we think? A, B, C, or D? You might need to reread it. All right, we've got an answer of B. Anyone else have an answer? All right, let's look at B. So a negative correlation. Do I have a whiteboard that I can pull up really quickly? So negative correlation is the one here. I'll just use my hands. Hopefully you're seeing. Is the one that's got a graph going down. So a A negative correlation between work-related stress and marital happiness indicates that as work-related stress rises, marital happiness is at a lower number. And actually, rises is probably the wrong word there. So B, marital unhappiness promotes work-related stress. You might think that by looking at the graph, but promotes, the difference here is that promotes is a really causal word. So promotes or is causing work-related stress, and that's not the case. We can't know that from a correlational study. Work-related stress has a negative impact on marital happiness. Again, in this case, this is a very causal language. It's impacting marital happiness. All we know from a correlational study is that they are correlated. They are associated. So when you see correlation, a key word you should look for is a synonym, associated. So it's actually C. So this is one of the hardest questions on the exam. So now you know it. It is there on the exam too. So higher levels of marital happiness are associated or correlated or related to, so those are some keywords to look for, are related to lower levels of work-related stress. Now, it very well be, or it might be that these are causally related, but from a correlational study, all we know is that they're associated, that they are related to one another. We don't know which one causes which, or if there's a third variable that causes both. So it is one of the harder questions on the exam. We went over correlations second or third day of class, so maybe review that as well. And again here, this is directly causal language. It doesn't have a causal influence. All right, we've got about 1 minute left, so I think, let's look, which one of these are some of the harder ones? This one's not actually that hard, but you might need to refer to your notes for it. So maybe we'll come back to 14. This one you probably haven't memorized, but you could look back at your notes. Here, to reduce sudden infant death syndrome, B, putting them to sleep on their backs, for number 18. So let's go over number 14 really quick. Basically, I'll just give you the answer right now for number 14. So number 14 is a passive genotype environment correlation. So Rachel loves to read books. She encourages her daughter to read regularly by taking her to the local library and buying lots of books. Rachel's daughter is an avid reader now. This is an example of a passive genotype environment correlation. So the daughter didn't do anything to change the situation. The parents, because they love to read books, they have changed the environment in a way that supports this trait of their child. So the child themselves didn't change things in their own environment. So 14 is a passive genotype environment correlation. All right, well, if you have any other questions on the study guide, I'm not going to send out a study guide key. Basically, I want you to use it as a study tool, but if there's one or two that you're really struggling with and you really don't understand, feel free to send me an email. But that is all for today. Hopefully you do well on the exam. I hope everybody gets an A, is what I hope. It's always fun to see everybody earn an A on the exam. So, and it has happened before too. All right, have a great rest of your day.